You may be calling love something that is actually fear, and that completely changes what seems to be happening. There is an invisible reason why you love the way you love. At the beginning, everything feels like intensity, presence, connection, but inside there is a tension that does not disappear, a silent anxiety that follows every gesture, every message, every absence. The heart races not only because of closeness, but because of the possibility of losing. A need for constant reassurance begins to appear, as if love depended on continuous proof, as if permanence had to be guaranteed all the time. Small signals gain enormous weight: a different silence, a delayed reply, a change in tone of voice. Everything feels like a threat, even when no real danger exists. There is fear of not being enough, fear of being replaced, fear of being abandoned. And the more this fear grows, the more the bond seems indispensable. As if losing that person meant losing part of your own identity. The mind tries to justify it, calls it passion, calls it deep love, calls it destiny. But something inside notices that there is suffering mixed in, an emotional weight that is hard to ignore. Because loving should not create so much insecurity, and yet it does, there is an invisible exhaustion in trying to maintain constant closeness, in trying to please, in trying to avoid conflict. As if any mistake could destroy everything, in this inner space, love stops being a meeting and begins to become survival. You love to avoid being alone, you love to avoid being rejected, you love to avoid disappearing without realizing it. The feeling begins to reveal another layer, an old need, a void that already existed before the relationship began. Relationships often awaken emotions that feel larger than reality. This happens because the other person activates inner contents that already exist. There is unconscious recognition when someone triggers immediate intense reactions, a sense of familiarity that is difficult to explain rationally. As if something inside says that this bond has special importance. But what seems like destiny may be reflection, because the psyche uses the other as a mirror. It shows inner parts that are still not fully understood, old fears, deep longings, unrecognized desires. The bond becomes intense because it touches sensitive emotional regions. Closeness brings temporary relief. Distance awakens anxiety, not necessarily because of the other person's behavior, but because of what they represent internally. They represent safety, acceptance, worth, belonging. When that representation seems threatened, disproportionate fear appears. Attachment grows, need increases, and the relationship begins to carry more emotional weight than it should. The mind tries to control situations, avoid conflicts, anticipate problems, everything to prevent the imagined loss. But the mirror continues showing something important, that suffering does not come only from the present. It connects with previous inner experiences, wounds that already existed before. The other person only activated them. Realizing this creates discomfort, because it challenges the idea that love depends only on the other person. It shows that there is invisible inner participation, and that emotional intensity may originate in your own psyche. Analytical psychology describes this process as projection. Unrecognized inner contents are perceived in the other. What belongs to your own psyche seems to come from outside. The other becomes the carrier of deep emotional meanings. The intensity arises because unconscious parts of the personality are involved: repressed fears, hidden desires, unmet needs. Everything finds expression in the relationship. The loved person may seem extraordinary or threatening, but both extremes may come from the same inner source. The shadow participates silently, showing aspects that have not yet been integrated. Carl Jung expressed this dynamic when he said, The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Carl Jung. This transformation is not always comfortable because it involves perceiving unknown inner contents. Love then stops being only emotion and becomes an experience of consciousness, an opportunity to recognize projected inner parts. When this perception emerges, something changes, need decreases, observation increases. Attachment loses intensity. The feeling begins to become more real, not because the other changed, but because consciousness began to grow. The bond stops being an attempt to fill and becomes a meeting between individuals. There is greater inner space, calmer emotional breathing, and the possibility of loving without losing your own identity. When projection begins to diminish, love changes in quality. It loses urgency, but gains depth. Anxiety reduces because the other stops being the exclusive source of safety. Identity returns to its own inner center. There is greater emotional freedom. The bond remains important, but not indispensable for existence. The meeting becomes a choice, not a necessity. Affection becomes lighter because it does not carry the expectation of salvation. There is space for human imperfections, differences, limits. Without the feeling of constant threat, love stops being survival and becomes shared presence, something that can grow naturally or end without destroying personal essence. Consciousness creates inner stability, like a flame that does not depend on external wind. Perhaps loving was never about possessing. Perhaps it was about recognizing the other as other, without demanding that they heal inner wounds, without demanding that they sustain identity. When this is understood, something inside relaxes deeply, as if an old tension quietly disappears. If this thought touched something in you, write in the comments the word consciousness, because it is when consciousness appears that love stops being fear and begins to become presence, like a silent galaxy that continues to exist, even when no one is looking.